education, voting rights and empowerment, racial and economic justice, relief efforts post-Hurricane Katrina, women-owned business, minority women-owned business opportunities, and workers' rights. Selvena's prior experiences in government span from the New York State Senate Majority Conference leader and the New York City Mayor's Office to Combat Domestic Violence, and even as a teen, volunteered for the first New York City Public Advocate. Selvena has remained committed and consistent to service throughout Queens. She served as an advisor to the NAACP Jamaica Youth Branch, chair to a number of committees within the Queens chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and board member to the Ocean Breeze Condominiums and Martin de Porres Youth and Family. It is also with my great honor to also introduce and have Councilmember Selvena Brooks Power come in and also give her remarks.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. It is great to be here in this virtual space with each of you. And thank you to my partner in good trouble, Councilmember Nantasha Williams. And as the council member said, this platform is really to be able to ensure our community-based organizations get the right tools and resources to be able to not only apply for discretionary funding on time, but also in understanding on how to pull down the discretionary funding, understanding what some of the qualifying activities are to get discretionary funding also. Just thinking back to when we had member items on the state level, and I used to do member items for our, at the time, local senator, you know, there were a lot of community-based organizations that had a hard time filling out the application. I see also Candace Prince Modeste on here, who's the former chief of staff to former council member Idani Miller, and she knows this firsthand also. She's always been a gem in helping folks in our community, even still, complete these applications. And so we want to make sure that you have access to us, that you are able to be successful when you apply. And I'm sure that they'll be sharing contact information to follow up with any questions. So without further ado, I'll pass it back to our most competent and qualified moderator and facilitator. And thank you so much, Councilmember Williams, for pulling today's panel together.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brooke Powers. We really appreciate it. Now we are going to go ahead and introduce the facilitator, the one that will be facilitating majority of the workshop that will be happening this evening. Her name is Candace Modeste, and just like what Councilmember Brooks Power has just stated, she is one that knows a lot when it comes to the discretionary funding. And I would just like to reiterate, we also have Everton Smith, the Budget and Legislative Director from the Office of Councilmember Nantasha Williams, who will also be here to answer any questions that you may have in regards to discretionary funding. With that being said, I would like to introduce Candace Modeste to come in and to say a few words before we go ahead and start our workshop.
Good evening, everybody. Just saying hello to and Happy New Year to everybody. There's a lot of familiar faces on the line, so glad to see everyone. Everything's been said already, so whenever you guys are ready for me to start, we'll jump right in.
Thank you so much, Candace. Before we go ahead and turn it over to you, I just wanted to ask for Miss Aaliyah Abraham. Are you on with us?
Yeah, she's on. Hey, okay. I'm here representing for BlaQue.
Hey.
Hi, I'm not Aaliyah. I'm Diana. I'm not Aaliyah, but I'm representing for
okay, there you go. Please go ahead and share a few words about your organization. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for having us on behalf of the Black Resource Network and Aaliyah Abraham. It is a pleasure to work with the community in this way as per usual. Some of the work that the Black Resource Network has done regarding just the governmental aspect of our community is there. So we definitely are excited to be on the call. She's having some technical difficulties with her computer, so that's why you see my face. But the Black Resource Network, a space for Black people in Queens to network and share resources. That's exactly what this platform is used to do. So again, it's an honor just to have I see some of the faces and some of the names on this call are Black Resource Network members. So hey, y'all, thank you for joining on. And please share, if you're on this from the Black Resource Network, please share this out to your networks, because this is really important information. Again, on behalf of Aaliyah Abraham and the Black Resource Network, it is an honor to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much. And again, like, we love the work that you do and that you continue to do with the community. And we are so thankful to partner up with you, as well as having you here with us tonight. So thank you once again. Without further ado, I would like to go ahead and turn this back to Ms. Candace Modis, as we are going to now go into our workshop portion of discretionary funding.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, I'm going to share my screen because, of course, I've got a lovely PowerPoint for you all. I'm going to run through it as quickly as possible because the fun stuff is usually after the PowerPoint, not, usually after the PowerPoint, not during it. So just so you can see the agenda for this evening. So first, I'm going to give an overview of what discretionary funding is, eligibility, timeline, what you can and can't use it for. We'll break there or I'll pause there rather for questions on that portion. And then we'll move into the application itself, what you should be putting in there, what you shouldn't, things like that. We'll take questions after that part. And then if we have time, we'll actually access the application in real time so that folks really get a feel for it. So what is discretionary funding? These are public monies that's intended to assist nonprofit organizations. Essentially, our city is huge. We've got 8 billion souls walking around here. And our city provides a lot of public services, but they can't do everything. And so they rely very heavily on our nonprofit partners to fill those gaps. And so that's the purpose of discretionary funding. It is up to each council member to decide how those monies are spent. Certainly, council members do get together and vote on several budgetary items, but when it comes to each council member's discretionary allocation, it is up to them in their office and solely up to them in their office. Okay, so don't get mad, don't march on their office or anything. That's their right. The funding must fulfill a public purpose. So generally speaking, it's an activity or service that's open to anyone. There's an asterisk next to that. Because, for example, if you're running a mentoring program for girls and a boy wants to come in, that can get a little fuzzy. But generally speaking, if there's someone in your immediate area that wants to take advantage of your programming and you have the capacity to let them in, you should be able to. Monies are reimbursed to organization once they sign a one-year contract and show they've spent the funds in accordance with their approved budget. So this is not to say that the budget gets passed June 30th, you find out that you got awarded $5,000 and then you get a $5,000 check on July 15th. That is absolutely not what happens. We'll go into the steps a little bit more, but please bear in mind that whatever your allocation is that you receive, you have to spend it first, and you probably won't see it back till maybe 9 to 12 months down the road, give or take. Okay, so please keep that in mind. These are not monies that are advanced right away. You have to spend the money first, and then you'll get it back once you show that you've done that according to the game plan. So who's eligible to apply? Tax exempt organizations who must be registered with the IRS and must be registered with the New York State Charities Bureau. Everything else is up to whomever, but those are the two absolute requirements. So it doesn't matter what sort of programming you're doing, what sort of services you're providing, you must be registered with the IRS and you must be registered with the New York State Charities Bureau and be up to date with those registrations. That means filing your annual 990s as well as your CHAR 500s. If your organization was created after July 1st of 2020, you'll be subject to additional vetting as well as funding caps, which we'll talk about a little later. So essentially, if you're a newer organization, the city council is just going to dig a little deeper to make sure that you are in a position to properly manage these funds. 501c3 status is the most common organization type funded. It's the one that we're all most familiar with, but you're not required to be a 501c3. There are all sorts of 501c whatevers, For example, 501c7s include social clubs, fraternities and sororities, hobby clubs, business associations, chambers of commerce. Those are C6s. So you don't have to be a 501c3. Please don't let people tell you that. That's wrong. You just have to be a 501c something. Types of funding available. This part really is where the council offices and council finance and so forth get more involved rather than you. The organizations are really, they just know they got funding and they're happy, right? But just so you know, so under expense funding, you've got funding for youth programming, aging programming, local, which is just sort of like an open pot, and then anti-poverty. There's capital funding. I put an asterisk next to that because we're not going to talk about that tonight. That's for long-term, large-scale, very expensive projects, and things like participatory budgeting fall under that, but we're not talking about that tonight. Then each borough delegation, so essentially each borough of council members gets together and they themselves can decide on a few projects or organizations to fund. And then you have got these citywide initiatives. So those of you who've received funding before may be familiar with some of them. DOVE, which is to combat domestic violence. CASA, which is after-school programming. Cleanup NYC, there's quite a number of them, and you'll see them on the application. And then we've got speaker funding that comes in expense and capital. So it's just a huge pot that the speaker's office has at their disposal to spend however they see fit. And then we've also got our caucuses. So these are subgroups within the council who also fund various organizations that meet with their priorities. So the first one, BLAC, stands for the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus. So for example, if your programming advances the causes of Black, Latinos, and Asians, you may want to apply for funding to the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus. There's the Irish Caucus, LGBT, Progressive, Women's, and Jewish Caucus. Keep in mind that if you are, well, I'll talk about it a little later again too, but keep in mind that if you are applying for funding from any of these caucuses, many of them do also have supplemental applications in addition to the general application. So please, if you're not sure, you can check with your council member's office to double check if there's an additional application needed. So some rules and dates for FY23. If you have never ever been funded by the city council before, the maximum amount of funding you'll be able to receive cumulatively is $20,000. So that means that maybe, 4 council members really love you and they each give you $5,000. Great, you've reached your max. If one individual council member loves you, the most they can give you your first time out is $10K, but you cannot get more than $20,000 your first year out. The minimum funding level for all awards is $5,000. Sometimes it goes as low as $3,000 for the Department of Cultural Affairs. We also see sometimes council members' offices will get together and one office will put in a certain amount, another office will put in another amount for the same project for the same organization. If this third bullet is a relatively new entry, if you maybe used to receive council funding and maybe you took a break for a few years and now you're back and better than ever, the cap on those types of organizations is $50,000 cumulatively and $25,000 from a single member. So keep that in mind. Again, if you maybe in the past you've received, haven't done it for a few years and now you're applying again, the most you can receive is $50,000 cumulatively. Some contracting agencies have started providing advanced funds to some organizations, but please don't expect that to happen for you, especially if you are a new recipient. I know that Department of Cultural Affairs, that's something they've been doing for some time. DYCD, it seems like, depending on the organization they're working with, but just know that it is a possibility. But there are other ways for folks to sort of bridge that gap between when they expend the funds and then when they're waiting for them to come back. The most important date that you need to know before we leave here is the deadline for the application, which is February 22nd of 2022, right? So if you haven't already started on your application, after we leave here tonight is a great time to do that, because the closer you get to February 22nd, let's just say it's not going to be good for you. Please, as soon as you can, get started on it. It's not particularly long and arduous, but as you get closer to the deadline, there are more people applying, and sometimes there are system hiccups, and the council really doesn't provide tech support. But however, they do have the application open for a month and a half, so get it in as soon as you can. Just some other important dates you should know. So once all the applications come in, the council offices and council finance and the general counsel's office will do some initial vetting, and some preliminary decisions will be made probably around mid to late March. Those decisions will then be finalized between May and June, pending some additional vetting. June 30th is when fiscal year of 2022 ends. That's the fiscal year that we're currently in. And July 1st of 2022, that should say, is when fiscal year 23 begins. So the fiscal years always begin July 1st and they always end June 30th. Some council offices issue award letters. Please don't sit around waiting for an award letter. You can always check to see whether or not you received an award by checking what we call Schedule C on the council's website. Some council offices, again, do send award letters, but they don't all do. So please don't sit around waiting for one. And then fiscal year 2023 will end on June 30th of 2023. So just wanted to give a little overview of the key players, the process, and the pre-qualification process. So once a council office has shown interest in funding a particular organization, that organization will be vetted by the council's finance and their compliance offices. Once the budget is passed and we're now going to start the clearance process, the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, they perform another set of vetting, and then you move to your contracting agency. That's who you'll work with to finalize your scope. So essentially what exactly you're going to be using those funds for, and the budget. So you've got to let them know what you're going to spend on what particular area. If you're receiving more than $10,000 in total funding, have to be pre-qualified by the Mayor's Office of Contract Services, and they'll send you all the great details on that. And for those of you who've been around for a long time, you remember you used to have to go back and forth downtown to sign off on your contracts, fill out a huge stack of paper. It would take all day and all night. Pretty much all of this is online now. You can fill things out using the passport system. You can do digital signatures. It's a lot easier now than it was probably 5 years ago, right? So allowable expenditures. So pretty much any operational expenses are allowable to be used for city council funding to be used for, but there are some little rules around certain things. So supplies, consumables, travel equipment, personnel, advertising, insurance, all these are great. Note about subcontractors and consultants. Ideally, the reason that a council member is funding your organization is because you have the tools, you have the expertise, you have the knowledge to provide a particular program or service. If you are spending the bulk of your council funding subcontracting out to others, then that means that you yourself are not directly providing those services. If I were sitting in the council member seat, I would say, well, what do I need to fund you for if you've got all these other folks providing the services? I could just cut out the middleman and just contract with them directly. So the expectation is that the recipient organization is themselves providing the bulk of programming. So let's just keep some subcontractors and consultant purchases to a minimum, okay? Unallowable expenses. Some of these should be kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised. So remember I said that you don't have to be a 501c3 to receive council funding. So For example, we do oftentimes fund C4s, and C4s oftentimes engage in advocacy work, and which sometimes means suing entities. You can't get funding from the city in order to sue the city. Let's make that very clear, folks, okay? So council funding will not cover legal fees or to sue the city. It won't cover any type of religious activity. It does not mean that they don't fund religious organizations. It just can't fund religious activity. Also, it will not fund political activity. But always, just to stay safe, always confirm with your contract manager if you're unsure of a particular expense. They will absolutely let you know what you can and can't spend those monies on before you actually go ahead and cut those checks. So just to recap, these funding allocations are on an annual basis. And so even if you've been getting funding every year for the last, 40 years, you have to submit a new application every year. They don't carry over from year to year. You have to be in good standing with the IRS and the Charities Bureau to get funding. That also means no outstanding tax warrants, liens, workers' compensation fines, none of that stuff. All of your business, all of your paperwork has got to be clear, okay? Organizations are contracting with the city to provide the services. It's not a grant. Nobody's cutting you a check on day one and you just go about and spend freely. You've got to show that you spent the money the way you said you were going to spend the money, and then you get it back. Until you sign off on a contract with your contracting agency, the council has the authority to increase, decrease, or rescind your allocation anytime they want to, right? So until a contract is signed, nobody owes you anything. Nobody, nothing is yours until you actually sign off on that contract. So I would strongly suggest that on June 30th or whenever Schedule C comes out, if you see your name up there, great, that's exciting, have a party, but do not go out the next day and start spending money. Nothing is guaranteed until you sign off on that contract with the city. And then just another reminder that you as the contracting organization should be the ones that are primarily providing the service or programming. So we want to keep those purchases for consultants or subcontractors to a minimum. Okay. All right. Let me pause here. Any questions so far? I don't know how you all want to do this. I'll stop share for a moment. Any questions so far on what we've covered so far?
We put it on the chat. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to raise your hand with the emoji on the bottom, and then we'll call on you one by one for any questions that you may have thus far.
Questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry. I rushed home. My name is Catherine Cherry. I'm the founder and ED of Del Gracia Corp. So good evening. I apologize for my lateness. Question. You said that we talked about the fiscal year, when it ends and when it starts. We said, don't go out, start spending money, yada, yada, yada. So the expense sheet that we are completing and submitting, is that, because again, the money has to be spent first before we get it. Are we looking at our expenses in fiscal year 2022 that we have spent, or is it what we are projecting for the fiscal year 2023, if that makes sense? I just want clarity. I understand the problem, but I just want to make sure that when I'm completing this application, I'm doing my expenses, because my money's already spent, okay? So I want to make sure that I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's. So if you could just, one more time, just go over that so that I am clear. And again, I apologize for not showing my face.
No worries, you're perfectly fine. Okay. You'll see when we go through the application that the application itself is only asking for the dollar amount and a short blurb about what you're going to spend the money on.
Okay.
Once you are funded and you get connected with your contract manager, at that point, the contract manager is going to ask you for a detailed budget.
Okay.
If you are being funded for FY23,
Mhm.
that means that any monies you can potentially be reimbursed for would be expenses that take place between July 1st of 2022 through June 30th of 2023.
Okay. Thank you. That's much clearer. That is much clearer. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. I know it. Okay. I know I saw some hands up previously. There is a question that asks, can you apply on behalf of a national organization? As long as, I'm almost certain that as long as the programming is taking place in New York City, or that the beneficiaries will be in New York City, and that the organization is, that they have a Charities Bureau number, a New York State Charities Bureau number, they should be okay. So for example, we've funded national organizations that have local chapters in New York City. So as long as that particular entity has an EIN, they're a 501c something, and they're registered with the Charities Bureau, and the work will be in New York City, they should be fine.
Candace, I see we have a hand raised. Well, I guess we'll go to Alexia first, then Sonia, then Michael.
Could you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, but if you don't mind,
Okay.
just raising your hand. We'll go to Alexia
Can you
first.
hear me? Okay.
It's okay. Go ahead and let Jackie go. It's okay.
Okay, go ahead, Jackie.
The young lady mentioned about the budget. The money, if you spend the money, is that going backwards? For example, this for the year 2022. I don't know.
Tonight's conversation is talking specifically about applying for fiscal year 23 funds.
Correct.
So once you contract with an agency, the clock starts July 1st of 2022. And it ends June 30th of 2023. So any spending you can do that could potentially get reimbursed, it would have to take place between July 1 of this year and June 30th of next year.
Gotcha.
So we're not talking about anything that happened prior to today.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Alexia, you want to do Alexia next?
Yeah. Hi. So just a couple of questions. The first one is there going to be any support for organizations, like a help desk, in case there are questions as to, how they're completing their application, or, just any updates before the submission date? That's the first question. The second one is, and I missed this part, and I do apologize for that, the piece where you were talking about the number of, I guess, just funding strands, or just different funding sources through through the discretionary funds. So there's going to be a site where all of these all these different funds are, there's a description for it, so you can check and see, can I apply for this one? Can I apply for that one? Is that how it's going to be laid out on the site?
So let me answer the second question first.
Okay.
The short answer is yes. And I'm actually going to take you through the application so you could see where you find all of that. And then for the first question, as far as support for organizations, so the Showing Hearts is available, and we'll provide the information at the end, so that if you do need a bit more hand-holding, we're actually planning to provide a few more sessions, smaller sessions, for folks who need that additional assistance. I'm available because I'm part of Showing Hearts community, so we're all in this together. And certainly your council member's office is available, but they wouldn't have access to go into your application to see how you're doing. they'll get everything at the end after the application closes. So they'll only be able to know afterwards whether or not you got it in or not, but you'll know because you'll get a confirmation email saying your application was submitted, here's your reference number. But absolutely, showing hearts. You'll have a lot of support. Don't worry about it.
I just want to chime in on that, Candace, really quickly. Yes, so to that point, Showing Hearts Foundation, we are a nonprofit co-working community. So we provide a platform where organization leaders could network with each other, share resources, share support, and help walk each other through certain processes like this. So we do various capacity building workshops and trainings. So we'll put some information in the chat if you do want to get connected, or any organization want to get connected to the co-working community. It's a free co-working community for nonprofit leaders. So we'll put information in the chat, log in, and then we'll let you know about the next in-person or virtual one-to-one that we're going through to help navigate the discretionary funding process.
Thank you.
Want to go to Sonia next or Michael?
Yeah. Hello. Hi. My name is Sonia. I just filled out a proposal, but that's for participant. What is it? It's a different funding.
Participatory budgeting.
So this one is totally different.
Absolutely.
Okay. So so this one, am I required to? Is there anyone that can be like a fiscal sponsor if we don't have a 501c3?
No. If you usually organizations use fiscal agents. Fiscal agent probably isn't the right term. It's really more of an administrative support. Usually smaller organizations that don't have the manpower to keep up with all the back and forth and so forth.
Right.
Those are the ones that use fiscal agents. But even if they do, they themselves have a 501c3 and they themselves are registered with the Charities Bureau. So both parties have to have 501c something status and be registered with the Charities Bureau.
Okay, so as we're part of a community garden. So we don't have a nonprofit. So there's no way that we could get funding through.
Not for this fiscal year, no.
Oh, no?
Because by the time in the past, you'd hear about folks who, submit their 501 application, in January or February, and then maybe by June or July, they get it. I'm not going to tell anybody that, that you can't or you shouldn't. You do whatever you want to do, but it's highly unlikely that everything's going to come through in time. And then realistically speaking, if you're just now getting that paperwork together, you may not necessarily have a body of work to reference. And so when that council member's office looks at your application, they're going to say, well, who are these folks? I don't know.
I thought that like community gardens, like Parks Department would be our 501c3. But it doesn't work like that.
This is an application. So you are requesting funding from a council member.
Okay.
So your application is going to go to whatever council member you're requesting funding from. And he or she is going to decide whether or not they want to fund your organization.
Okay. So there's no way you have your own 501c3 to get this.
You have to be a 501c something and be registered with the New York State Charities Bureau.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mike, I've been seeing you holding on for a while. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. I have I guess a little bit of a nuanced question that is more so directed towards our council people. So are we at a disadvantage? So the services that we provide are not necessarily needed by the immediate community that we reside in, at least that where our facility is. We're in Jamaica Estates, and we're providing services for a demographic that would not be in Jamaica Estates, for formerly incarcerated youth, for youth that are involved in the homeless shelters, and that's not particularly here. So just crossing the lines of districts as far as services provided and the people that don't live in district, where do we fall as far as attractiveness to council persons being serviced outside of their district or servicing people outside of their district?
That's a good question, and I'll give you my answer, and then I'll see if anyone else wants to chime in. Again, discretionary funding is at the discretion of the council members. So the only requirement, aside from being a 501c something and being registered with the Charities Bureau, that's really, those are the only basic requirements that have to be met in order for a council office to fund you. So in other words, that means that if a council member from Queens wants to fund an organization in the Bronx, they can do that. People are going to ask them questions, they're going to scratch their head, they're going to look at them funny, but there's nothing else stopping them from doing that. So if a council member on one side of town sees the value in your service on the other side of town, they can fund you. It's, you know, whether or not they actually do is a different story, but there's nothing preventing them from doing that.
Fair enough. Any council members that want to speak on that?
Want to jump in and
Candace said it all, but yes. So we have many organizations. We could use the Met Council, who is a big organization, but they're stationed in Manhattan, but they service all over the 5 boroughs, and council members from all 5 boroughs do actually fund them, even though they're centrally located in one location. But people come from all over, and they go out to other communities and assist, whether it's for food or for clothing or for programming. So that answer is what Candace said is correct. Anyone could fund. It's at, as she said, and she's going to reiterate again, it's at the discretion of the actual council member who they fund.
Fair enough.
awesome.
But I would just also want to say one more thing. Our office is also doing a supplemental form, and one of those questions will be asked: what are the areas that are you actually serving? And then it does look good if you decide to fund a community, the immediate community versus a different community, because then the council member can say, hey, they're serving in our community, why not give them funding? Instead of, hey, you're serving in a different community, why would I want to give you money, even though you're doing good work? I mean, why not ask another council member whose community you're actually serving for funding?
Yeah, our dilemma is we're living in another community, hopefully servicing your community. But point well taken. Thank you.
And I did see another question in the chat about a fiscal agent. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that that was answered, or I want to see if there were any other questions on fiscal agents or fiscal sponsors. And just a general last call for questions from part 1 so far. Diana, is your hand up?
Hey, Candace. Yeah. So I guess just to clarify, so you have to have a 501 something, right? 501c something. And let's just say that you have your fiscal sponsor. Are they able to write in to their programming a part of your operation to get funding from that in that way? Can they do that? So let's say my fiscal sponsor can say part of their funding will go to my organization to run this program. Is that a possibility?
I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking, because it almost sounds like the fiscal sponsor, in addition to being a fiscal sponsor, is also being almost like a subcontractor. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because they're providing some of the services, or are they providing services separate and apart from what you're doing?
So, yeah, I guess they would be the subcontractor in this regard. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as that amount is minimal, so like under 30% as a rule, it should be okay. But fiscal sponsors, you always want to make sure both parties have the basic requirements. And and that your contract manager signs off on everything before folks start spending money willy-nilly.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again so we can roll over to part 2. And my facilitators and so forth just help me on the time, because I do want to make sure that I have time to go into the application in real time so that folks can see exactly how this looks.
Well, before Candace jumps in and do that, I did drop the link for the application in the chat box. If you need the application link, it's actually in the chat box, okay?
Perfect. So we are all on the same page, right? So how do you apply? There's the link on my screen. The link is in your in the chat. But short answer, it's council.nyc.gov/budget. And you'll look for language that refers to fiscal year 2023, and you'll see a big blue bubble that says apply here or something like that. So the application gods have been listening to a lot of you for the past few years, and so the application now can be completed in multiple sessions. So essentially, just like anything else, you'll create a username and password, which will allow you to come in and out of the application at your leisure. Once upon a time, you had to get all your paperwork and everything together and hunker down and knock it out in one session, which was horrible, because if you messed up, you had to go back and just start it all over again. So we don't have that anymore. There is an application checklist right at the beginning, so that'll help you to assemble all your required documentation. Everton talked about a supplemental application that his office is requiring. Some other offices, some caucuses, some delegations may also require supplemental applications. So before you start, you may want to, I strongly advise that you reach out to every entity who you will be applying to see if there is a supplemental application. Additionally, after you finish completing this application online, there are supplemental documents that are required, essentially your signature page, if you will, as well as a conflict of interest, a few conflict of interest forms that you would just print out, fill it out, sign it, scan it back in, and upload it to the system. So your application is incomplete until those items are received. Make sure that the right person from your organization is completing the application. Again, you've got time, right? But you really don't want incorrect information being inputted, so much so that it, prevents you from receiving funding. The most recent version of your browser is suggested, and enabling cookies and JavaScript will always work in your favor. If you don't know what that means, please find somebody who does, so that you don't have those problems, okay? So it's just some screenshots you'll see in the next few slides, but we'll look through it in real time so you can better understand how this is going to look. So if you go to the council's website, you'll put in your username and password. You'll see that there are tabs on the top. You could toggle in between these. So maybe, for the first page where it asks for organization information, there are some items you don't quite have handy yet. You can always toggle down to further down into the application to fill in that information and save it and come back later. So in the organization and contact information, it's going to ask for your estimated budget. Let's be very reasonable here. If your annual budget is $50,000 and you're requesting $100,000 from the city council or the council member, that's not going to fly, right? Some offices pay attention to that, some don't. Some just giggle and keep scrolling. But let's be realistic. These funds are meant to supplement programming that you already have going on, or maybe add a new program to what you already have going on. Council funding should not be funding your entire operation, right? Under the funding information section, amount requested, people always ask, how much can I ask for? How much should I ask for? Well, you already know that if this is your first time requesting or potentially receiving council funds, the most you can get cumulatively is $20,000. And the most you can get from any individual council member is $10,000. So again, this is one of those sections where, sometimes we just, look at the amount and we giggle and keep it moving. But realistically speaking, I mean, I can't tell you what to put in or what not to put in. I don't know how many characters that field holds, but just know that there is a finite amount of money that each office can allocate. All of that is public information as well on Schedule C. You can look back and see how much organizations have received in the past, but ultimately put the number that you need, right? So if this is not the time to be modest, if you need $15,000, put $15,000. Usually we can't, or it's frowned upon for us to fund you for more than you ask for, within reason, but just put how much you need. Ultimately, the office is going to do what they can, but put how much you need and we'll see what we can do, right? If you're requesting the same amount from several members, only one application needs to be submitted. I'll talk about this more once we get into the application itself, but just know that if your intention is to request $20,000 from 5 members, you don't need to submit 5 applications. The application will allow you to simply check off which members you're requesting funding from, and your application will go to each of those offices. Contracting agency, I still don't understand why they have organizations choose their contracting agency, because some of the programming is very specific. But just so you know, any out of school time programming, after school, weekend youth programming, or community programming, more than likely will be housed with DYCD, Department of Youth and Community Development. Any cultural programming is going to go to the Department of Cultural Affairs, and they have a separate application. They're like tweaking their whole operations. I don't even know if last time I checked on their website, they didn't even list the application deadline yet, but they've instituted a whole new set of rules. So if you traditionally have been funded from the Department of Cultural Affairs, please go and check their website, because they've got a whole new thing going on now. Senior program is going through DIPTA, Department for the Aging, and any health services are going through DOHMH, Department of Health and Mental Health. There are a few more, but you'll see on the application. So some helpful hints, speaker and citywide initiatives. So you see over here on the top left, there's the section where you would enter in the amount that you're requesting. And as a reminder, the minimum is $5,000. I don't know how many digits you could fit in here. Have fun, put up whatever you want, but ultimately the office is going to fund you at whatever level they feel is necessary. Over to the right of that is where you would select the contracting agency. Again, I don't know why they still have this on the application. There's got to be a reason, but you'll select the agency that you feel fits closest to the type of programming that you provide. Below that asks if the organization is seeking funding relating to speaker initiatives or citywide initiatives. So that's that big open pot of money I talked about earlier. And you have a drop down of the initiatives available here. There was a question earlier about descriptions of the initiatives or descriptions of the funding that's available. And you would find that by looking at a previous year's Schedule C document. And I can show you where that is later on. And then further down here, you'll see all the council offices, all the council members. This is an old screenshot, but essentially what you would do on the top left, you would enter in. So with the example earlier, if you were applying for $20,000 from 5 council members, you would enter 20,000 here on the top left. And then down at the bottom, just check off which council members you're requesting funding from.
Well, Candace, jump over. Let's go back, Candace, because I know that there is also a tab for new initiatives. And so if you have a great idea for initiative, this is the opportunity to put it here. There should be a tab that says new initiative, because I know after the budget is passed, we generally meet afterwards, and then they go over initiatives, and sometimes there's monies left over and they could create new initiatives. Just wanted to throw that in there too.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll try to leave a couple of minutes so we can go in the application in a live application so folks can see it and get familiar. Thank you. Again on, I just talked about this. Oh, just a note, if you are serving 3 or more council districts, you should consider applying for borough delegation funding, caucus, as well as borough president funding. Borough president's a whole another thing for another day, but just know that it's available. And if you have questions, definitely you can reach out to the co-working community about that. But yeah, essentially, if your work stretches beyond a particular council district or 2, you may want to seek funding from these other entities. The purpose and use of funds, very important. So the geographic area served, we talked about this a little earlier. Generally speaking, yes, council members want to fund people, organizations who are providing services within their council area, within their council district. So they're going to ask you, where are your services, or where's the target population, where the geographic area being served. Your services should be open to the public. So in other words, you're not, providing after school care for only green kids with red noses, right? That's not nice and that's not fair. And you should be providing it to everybody in the area within reason, right? The location where your services are being offered is super important because the council will we'll check with the Department of Buildings to make sure that the location that you say makes sense. So in other words, if you're running a tennis program, but the address that you list where the tennis program is going to be held is, like a 2-bedroom apartment in Bed-Stuy, like that doesn't make sense, right? That's not going to fly. So we want to make sure that that works, right? That makes sense. Your promotion and advertisement. So again, speaking to the public purpose, we want to make sure that these funds are being used for the greater good and that you're making an effort to let the entire community know that your programming is available, right? So they want to see copies of flyers, brochures, your Facebook page, all that showing that you're definitely in the community, you're part of the community, you're open and available to everyone. Religious, private, and elected office public affiliation. So essentially, we want to make sure that, again, if you're a religious organization applying for funding, that you are also opening up your services to the entire community and not just the folks in your house of worship, right? Certainly, it's expected that a good amount of the people taking advantage of your services will come from your individual organization, but there should still be an effort to reach out to the greater community. We always want to make sure that your organization, we want to know if your organization is connected to any elected official. Anyone who's been around New York City for a while knows that sometimes there's some funny business and we just want to get ahead of it and not find out about it on the front post, right? Required attachments that I talked about earlier, the certificate of authorization, a conflicts of interest form, the organizational elected official affiliation disclosure. I just want to make sure people understand that disclosures, whether or not you actually have a connection to an elected official, it doesn't automatically negate your opportunity to receive funding. All it is that the council wants to know ahead of time, right? They don't want any surprises later on. They don't want any gotchas. So if the council member happens to be your cousin, just write it down. Like, don't try to lie about it. Don't try to hide it. Just, it doesn't mean that you can't get funding, but they just give them the opportunity to get the information and figure out whether or not it's going to be a problem. And then that supplementary form I mentioned earlier for newly formed organizations. So we talked about a lot here, and we just kind of scratched the surface a bit, but we want to make sure definitely that you're reviewing your draft applications before you submit them. Again, today is the 31st of January. The application isn't due until the 22nd of February, but you want to do it right. You don't want to just, send in any old thing. You want to represent your organization the right way. So Once you finish your draft, you have the option to email it to yourself, email it to your mom, to your executive director, your treasurer, whoever. Let somebody else look it over and make sure it makes sense, make sure it best reflects who you are as an organization before you actually submit it. Once you submit it, you'll get a confirmation email. Ooh, just did something wrong. You'll get a confirmation email and a reference number. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna put my information in the chat because I was rushing and put it in incorrectly. But Showing Hearts is here. I'm here. Your council offices are here. So check in with all of us. Let us know what you need, what questions you have, so on and so forth, so that you can get the help you need. Okay. David, should I just open up the application real quick before we go into questions, or should we stop here and see if there are other questions?
Yes, you can go straight into the applications and we can go into the questions.
Got it. Thank you. Let me. And just know that if you walk away from your application for about an hour and a half, like I have, it's going to log you out. So I need to log back in. Give me a moment. And certainly in the interim, feel free to put questions in the chat so that we can come right back to them or that you don't lose them. Okay. Let me share my screen again. Okay. So once you put in your username and password, it'll bring you to the home page. If you already have an application in process, you're gonna, let me just make sure everybody can see my screen. You can see me, see New York City discretionary funding application on the screen. Yes, no, maybe so, nod your head.
We can see it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this is what you're gonna see if you already have an application in process like I do. You will go to it here. Otherwise, you would create a new application up here. So let's go here. I haven't actually done anything, so don't worry about it. Okay. So this is reminding you of the deadline, right? No later. Oh, we talked about it, but we didn't talk about it. If you don't get this application in by the 22nd, Councilmember Williams can't do anything for you. Councilmember Brooks Powers can't do anything for you. Speaker Adams can't do anything for you. Everton is not going to be, running all over the place, going crazy, trying to help you. Okay. Like, you've got 3 weeks. There should be no excuse. Please get those applications in before the 22nd. Okay. Here's the application checklist that I mentioned earlier, and it lays out very clearly everything that you will need to get this done properly, right? So your EIN, Charities Bureau, your budget. Just hold on for me, okay? Whether or not you're pre-qualified in the Accelerate, formerly the Accelerator, now Passport, any sort of background information about your organization, if you had audits or anything like that. So everything is laid out here for you. So if we go to the next screen, it's now asking you for, actually, let me do this. Let me back up. I'm actually going to start a new application. So if, say, something happens and you want to, you need to come out, the exit is on the top right over here. And, it shows me something different. You can always just go back in. Oh, no, access submitted in progress applications. Yes. And you put in your email address and your password. Sometimes people get caught up there. So I'm going to do a new application just so everybody can see exactly. And you see it looks pretty much the same, right? So they're going to ask, what's your organization's name? And this is organization, right? What are we known as? CO. What's our EIN? Whatever it is. Has it ever been used by any other organization? No, it's mine. Have we ever used any other one? Nope, nope, nope. Are we tax exempt? Yes. Is it current? Yes. So just so you know, if any of this is no, you're gonna have problems. So hopefully it's yes for all of these, okay? Have you ever applied for council funding? I don't know why they asked that. They can find out, but whatever, just answer it. And you see here, if your organization was incorporated before July 1 of 2020, then they're going to refer you to the supplementary form, which is, again, they're just doing a bit more vetting to make sure that you are a legitimate organization. Are you registered with the Charities Bureau? Yes. If so, you put in your Charities Bureau number. If you're exempt from registering with Charities Bureau, that's usually for religious organizations, and they're going to have you fill out this exemption form here, right? Your mission and goal and statement, right? To save the world. Why not, right? Estimated operating budget. Let's say I don't have any much money, $50,000. Did we apply for pre-qualification status? I don't know, but let's say we did, right? You're going to provide your street address. You're going to provide your website. Right? Your primary contact and all that. So very important over here, right? If these people you enter here don't know how to answer their phone or really don't know how to answer their emails, you're in a lot of trouble. Because everything is going to be coming, any sort of communication from office, from council finance, from the mayor's office of contract services, from your contracting organization, are going to be going to those two people. So if the information that you enter in here, specifically that email address, if they're not good, or if those folks just never answer their email, you're in for a world of trouble. Nobody's giving you any money, because at some point they're going to get tired of chasing you down. They're going to assume that you don't need the money, and they're going to move on to somebody else. Okay. Next page is asking. So this is the fun part. You're going to figure out how much you're requesting. Let's say we want $20,000. We're going to, so these are all the agencies that you can potentially contract with. Again, I don't know why they give us all these options, but I like DYCD, so let's go with them. I'm also going to take a shot at speaker initiatives. So I'm going to jump down here for a second. So the council members I would want to apply to for my particular organization would be Adams, and maybe I do a little in the Bronx, so I'll do Salamanca, and I do some work near Left Rack, I'll do Moya, and I do some work in South Brooklyn, I'll do Brannon. And of course I want Councilmember Williams, and I want Councilmember Brooks Powers. And because I did 3 or 4 in Queens, I'll try for Queens delegation. Up here, coming back up to the speaker initiatives and citywide. So you've got tons of options here. You can, as I mentioned earlier, go back to any previous, I guess the last Schedule C to get a description of the particular initiatives. Let's say I want, I don't know, after school enrichment and, right? Down here, they're asking, they essentially want to make sure that your organization isn't involved in any funny business, right? So you'll answer these questions accordingly, and please tell the truth. You'd be surprised how much a Google search can bring up. So please tell the truth. Purpose and use of funds. So you want to provide the name of your program. And this is kids. Specific programming or services to be funded. This could be short and sweet. I don't know what the character limit is here, but they're not looking for a whole, they don't need your whole life story. Funding will support school supplies and, I don't know, recreational activities for kids in Springfield Gardens. They don't need to know we're going to spend $400 on jump ropes and $800 on books and $1,200 on snacks. This is not the place for that. Okay. When will the program operate? Monday through Friday, 4 to 7 p.m. Target population, kids in Springfield Gardens. Gardens. Geographic area, Springfield Gardens. Briefly describe the staffing. So you'll talk about who's actually going to be running the program, the community benefit, or the services that are being considered. So you say, youth enrichment, alternatives to keeping kids out of violent situations, things like that. A description of what the organization does or plans to do to invite the community. So Facebook, IG, blah, blah, blah. The address or the location where the programming is being offered. So if I put my home address here, they're going to pull it up on Department of Buildings or whatever, and they're going to see this is a private home and I shouldn't have other people's kids in my private home, so that's not going to fly. So it's got to be some sort of community space or some sort of space that's large enough to provide the services that I'm saying I want to provide. Does the organization charge fees? If you do, it's not a problem. You just need to disclose that, and your contract manager will work with you to make sure that you follow all the rules regarding fees. Past service capacity, they just want to make sure that you can do what you say you're going to do. Did the organization receive funding in 2021? If you did, you just describe here how those funds were used. Any performance evaluations, if you have them, disclose them here. If not, just put NA. I don't like to keep things blank on these, so we don't want any guessing games. So if something doesn't apply to you, please put something not applicable or NA, but make sure that it's very clear that they know that you saw that question and answered that question. Here's where I was talking about earlier about subcontractors. So we want to make sure that we're using them as a minimum. So they want to know, does your organization have the capacity to provide the proposed services? So don't put yes, and then later on, half of your budget or 75% of your budget is going towards subcontractors. It's not going to work. Religious and private affiliation, again, a lot of this is just as disclosure. No one's saying that you, as a religious organization, that you can't receive council funding. You just need to make sure that that your programming is open to everyone in your area. So that's what this section is going to establish. Similarly, when we were talking about disclosures, if the council member is your cousin, please write that. If the council member is your neighbor across the street, please write that. Please try not to hide things because they'll find out and it's not going to look good. You want to make sure you review the policies and procedures. I think I had them up somewhere, but it is on the council's website and it has been updated as of January. So make sure you review that document. Got to certify that you did all your documentation correctly. And then they're going to show you the attachments that you have to upload. So that's the certificate of authorization, the conflicts of interest, the elected official affiliation. And then here's where you put, for example, examples of flyers and things to show that you're open and available to the community. If you're not ready to submit it, you would hit save and finish later here on the bottom left. And if you know that you're done and you're ready to get this money, you would hit review and submit. Once you do that, you will receive an email saying that you submitted your application. Here's your reference number. And just wait to hear the good news, right? Okay, that's all I have. Questions. Question. Yep, Jackie, I know you had something earlier. Go right ahead.
I think it was number 4. So, what's number 4? I just look mislocate my paper. Okay, on the what is it? What's it here?
Checklist.
The HH something prerequisite. Here you go. HH something for prerequisite.
Checklist.
They're on the checklist.
Right. Is your organization currently getting council funding?
No, we know.
Okay, so don't worry about it.
Don't